Contrary to what we thought originally, many of you out there enjoyed Steve and I dancing, doing the salsa, and especially Steve's belly dancing number.
It was pretty
I have
sexy.
gotten so
It was
many
pretty
messages,
sexy.
Steve. I have gotten so many messages. Dr. Carrier, you don't even want to know, so
Don't
we
ask.
won't even
Don't
burden you with that. But
Just don't ever dance with Kyle because he never lets you lead. That's all only thing I got to say.
yeah, but I will say that I look good in a sombrero. I will say that. Welcome to NonSequitur. I'm Kyle Curtis. As always, Steve McCrae is here. David is producing. And we are joined by the one and only Dr. Richard Carrier, who has been with us a couple times before, actually. So we welcome him back. Thank you for joining us and taking out the time.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
And we'll get to the discussion here in just a second. But first, as always, we're going to run through what we've got coming up for the rest of the week. Big week starting tonight, actually. Obviously, with Dr. Carrier here. And we will then go at 10 Eastern as soon as it comes up. David?
Do we have a loss of David?
There we go.
There
we go. Okay. All right. So tomorrow, Sargon of Akkad will be with us. He will be having a discussion with Brittany Simon on social justice, feminism, and intersectionality. Actually, Dr. Carrier and Sargon will be debating at Mythcon, so maybe we can ask him about that here in just a few minutes. Friday, we have, I don't have a slide for that for Friday yet. Sorry about that. Friday is Tim O'Neill. He runs the blog History for Atheists. He will be with us on Friday at 8 Eastern. And then on Saturday, we will be doing we've done 2 betas of these. They went really well. So we're going to jump in and just do the entire show like we originally planned on Saturday. So I know it says beta 2 up there, but this will be the real one. The 2 that we did before went really well. So if you're interested in being a part of Debate Roulette, you can join our Discord. The link is below, and there will be a spot for you to go and sign up. We will randomly choose 2 people based on the topic wheel. We'll spin a wheel to choose the topic. You will vote whether you are for or against, and then we will randomly select 2 people to come in and debate. So try to get in 3 rounds this time. The first 2 episodes went really well. We got 2 in, but we're going to shoot for 3 on this one. So join us for that if you want to. And then on Sunday, he's back. If you have missed Aaron, he will be back on Sunday at 8 p.m. He will be debating George Lujack on creationism. Lujack, he subscribes to the old Earth model, unlike Kent Hovind. And actually, Kent Hovind was the inspiration for why I reached out. He felt that Kent didn't represent the position well enough. So he's going to try to pick up where Kent left off. Okay. After that, I mentioned it yesterday. I'll mention it briefly now. On the 24th of June, we're doing Flatline, similar to Debate Roulette, but with a flat Earth topic. The audience on this one actually will vote live as we are streaming. There will be a 3-tiered color marker on your screen. You will vote as that needle gets closer to red. Once it hits that red mark, they're booted from the call, and we will record their time, and the person who lasts the longest wins. So it's kind of like a flat Earth rodeo, if you will. We'll see how it goes. Could be a dumpster fire, but we'll see. And that will be it for what's coming up. Yeah, we try. We have I want to get the audience involved a little bit. I know it sounds. Dr. Carrier's probably like, "Oh my God, that sounds crazy." But when we decided to do the debate roulette thing, we thought the same thing. We were like, "Oh, this is going to be absolute disaster." But when they came on, we've done 2 episodes of it. Yes, it was fantastic. I mean, everybody had a sound argument. It was really shocking. So
that's cool.
When that dumpster fire comes, though, it's going to come big time. Well, as I said, Richard Carrier is here with us this evening. I'm going to let Steve kind of introduce what we're going to be talking about tonight, and then we will hear from the man himself, Dr. Carrier.
Okay. Anyways, I got to say this real quick though. I was like Kyle. I wasn't expecting much on this debate roulette. I thought people were going to come in. It was going to be just people have no idea what they're talking about. Just be a total dumpster. You guys were awesome, just brilliant. I was blown away. So thank you. But anyways, we got Dr. Richard Carrier back. He's one, as you guys know, one of my favorite people to talk to. He is a long-standing American historian. He's written many books on the mythicism of Jesus and has been on our channel numerous times talking about that. But today we're kind of going to be talking about something that I've been talking with Kyle about, and I talked to Richard about, in regards to, is doubt a virtue? And maybe if we can have time a little bit into objective morality, because I had read a lot of Richard's stuff on his blogs and I'm just enthralled by it. So maybe we can kind of touch on that. But I liked what Richard was saying as far as his approach to if doubt is a virtue from a pragmatic point of view. And I don't know if that was the point was you're trying to argue, but I was trying to argue that doubt was not a virtue, and Kyle was arguing that doubt was a virtue. I was using either virtue ethics from a morality point of view and virtue epistemology from an epistemic point of view. And he was using it as doubt would be something that people would use to try to get out of religion or get out of things that are clearly pseudoscience and things like that. That's the approaches that I think we were both coming from. And I think that you, Rich, were kind of in the middle there from what I was gathering. And that's why I wanted to bring you on, kind of suss that out a little bit.
Right. If I had been in the middle of that debate, my first thing would have been to like get you both to actually explain what you mean by doubt, because it sounds like you both were using the word in different ways, right? So how you answer that question depends on what you mean by doubt. There's certainly, I mean, obviously there's excessive doubt, like doubting everything, never like always questioning everything and never accepting evidence is bad. And also delay. Sometimes we have to make a call. Like sometimes you have to make a decision. Doubt doesn't serve you in those circumstances, even though you know you might be wrong. Like you have to make the best decision you can make given the information you have. So there are ways in which doubt can be bad, but there's also ways in which doubt is essential, like not just good, but you need it to avoid the opposite error, which is dogmatism or superstition, or never updating your beliefs, never responding to evidence, and things like that. So
absolutely, yeah, we both agree on that part. Yeah,
yeah. So you might say like questioning. Like, do you mean questioning? Questioning is good. Is there a point when you shouldn't question? And you could talk about like social customs. There may be social circumstances in which you just keep your mouth shut, right? But in terms of like philosophy and your worldview and like considering what your beliefs are, your own private cogitation, you should be able to question everything, and you should actually have that as a constant standard. Like that's one of the things that I'm always doing is I'm always questioning whether, wait a minute, do I know I'm right? Like, how would I know I was wrong? And then I go and like try to prove myself wrong. And if I fail, that's how I know I'm right, basically.
Exactly.
So it's like if I put a really good test in, like it should have failed if these tests would have were carried through, and it didn't. That's a good, strong test. And I mean, you can never be certain. So like there's lots of things I'm really certain of that I still go back to and keep questioning and re-examining, especially when I get new information. But even when not, even when someone brings up a topic like this, I stop and think like, well, I don't know, like, are my thoughts on this correct? And I go through the whole questioning cascade again. I think that's a virtue and very valuable, but you do have to end the questioning at some point. I mean, you do have to come to a decision.
Well, how about like, I will give you a brief synopsis, how I'm using the word, then Kyle can as well. How about that works? Okay. The way when I think of doubt as a virtue, I'm using virtue as in the Aristotelian version of virtue. Basically, that is something we strive to. It's a golden mean, meaning that it's in between two vices. It's somewhere in between. For example, as you said, you don't want hyperskepticism and you don't want to be gullible. So open-minded would be an epistemic virtue, or fair-minded would be an epistemic virtue. That comes from virtue epistemology. And I think that he would be arguing similar. I don't think anybody's going to say doubt is a moral virtue.
I love that way of framing it. Aristotle's a genius for having given us that gift.
And so I think that's a wonderful way to do it. I am a virtue ethicist when it comes to morality, and I tend to, and I do think virtue epistemology, this is the way I would approach it. And so when I'm saying that doubt is not a virtue, that is what I mean by it. Of course, doubt is something we should have. Skepticism is something we should have. We should be always willing to reevaluate our beliefs, no matter what they are. But it's not a virtue because I believe personally that virtue is something we always strive to. And doubt is something we don't always strive to, because doubt is something that we don't always want to have, because we don't want to doubt two things. So it is a benefit that we can use. It's a tool, just like anything else. It can be good, but it also cannot be good. And a virtue must, in my way of looking at virtue epistemology, it must always be the best.
You frame the virtue that's in the middle of the two extremes that are bad, as open-mindedness. Is that what you said?
Open-minded would be in the middle.
Yeah, that's what I meant. That would be the virtue. Yeah. Open-mindedness would be
that'd be the virtue, and then the two vices. The deficit would be
excessive doubt,
skepticism.
Would be the vice. Inadequate doubt would be the opposite vice.
Okay. So, or the opposite fallibility would be the other vice. Or just like you said, like
sure. I think you framed it better. Your vocabulary.
You could be brutally honest, right? In social norms, you don't want to be too brutally honest, right? So honesty is that medium, but you don't want to be brutally honest, and you don't want to be a liar. So you want that.
There's two different things there, though, right? There's social interaction stuff, and then there's your worldview building. So there's stuff that you can do in your own head that you can be much more brutal and honest and exploratory about. Whereas how you engage society is more about social conventions and what you're doing in terms of damaging or solidifying social relations. So that's different. And then of course there's persuasion and education, which is a third thing altogether. And those are three different domains that will be governed by a different set of how to conduct them, really.
Yeah, well, that's what you were kind of arguing before, that you were saying that as a pedagogical type approach, where if you're going to have a conversation with somebody, that you could use a basic understanding of the word doubt. And I get that. And it's a societal norm. Yeah. I understand that. But since I think these things are philosophical concepts, I can't go with the approach that doubt is a virtue, because it's just simply not to me. But I mean, maybe Kyle can give his perspective on how he's using the word. That makes sense to me.
So let's hear the other side. What was the counter to that?
My counter is I'm approaching it very simplistically. I mean, just as simple as possible. Is doubt a virtue? And one of the definitions of virtue is a beneficial trait or quality. And I think that doubt absolutely would be a beneficial trait or quality, because I think that even if you question everything, let's say that, and I'm not encouraging that, but let's say you do. Let's say you go through life and you just question every single thing that comes by your way. The only harm that comes from that is that you confirm that you're right. I mean, other than that, there's really no downside to it. You're just kind of confirming what you thought in the beginning. So the philosophical approach is, one thing. I don't know, so I can't speak to that. But the question was asked very simply: is doubt a virtue? And so my stance is absolutely, because without it, I mean, I wouldn't have gotten out of religion at all. I'd still be there. And I think that's true for a lot of people.
By doubt, you have to have. Do you mean questioning though? Do you mean?
Yeah, he doesn't mean like
uncertainty. What do you mean by doubt? That's you're right. Exactly.
I mean, doubt is indecision, right? Doubt to me is indecision. When you doubt a proposition, you're indecisive. That's how I just know.
That's even different from uncertainty, right? Indecision is different from uncertainty. Yes. But I think the other side here is we're talking about questioning. So I think you're both using doubt in a different term. So like questioning is a virtue, being open to questioning, or that's not the right way to put it either.
Skeptical, I think, is okay. You could probably make an argument for skeptical,
but
I still think that
can
falls
be abused,
under open-minded.
Right? Yeah, if you say skepticism is a virtue, and then someone comes along and says, "Oh yeah, I'm a skeptic of everything all the time. I don't believe anything." Then now you've got the vice, right? You've gone beyond the Aristotelian mean into the extremes. So you do have to define it more. No, I think you have to define it more in terms of what you mean. And I agree. I think you're both right.
But depending on how we're using it.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, because the problem I'm finding, though, is doubt is not always beneficial. If I have a proposition that's true, I don't want to doubt that proposition. Therefore, doubt is not always beneficial. Thus, it is not a virtue. Can it be? But yeah, sure. But anything could be a virtue. We want to believe things that are true, and we want to disbelieve things that are not true. Doubt is just like belief. They are not virtue in and of itself. You can't say belief is a virtue for the same reason, because we can believe false things. But is it virtuous that we believe good things? Not really, because we can believe false things. So belief itself, in of itself, is not, to me, a virtue. Does that make sense? And doubt is just the opposite of belief, like that.
I see what you mean. Yes, if you define doubt as constant uncertainty, never landing on a belief, right? But at the same time, I mean, the reality is the virtue is, first of all, evidence-based belief is a virtue. Your beliefs should be proportioned to the evidence, for example.
I can believe
But
that.
that's
Yeah.
always going to be a probability, right? You're never going to be absolutely certain of anything. But you do have to go through life assuming you are until you have the opportunity or the space to stop and question. And the thing is, I think what the other side we're talking about here is that you do need to make sure that you always do stop and make space to question the things that you're assuming are true. And I think because you can get to that point and say, well, yeah, I was open-minded and I was skeptical and I questioned and then I came to a conclusion and now I don't have to look at that again. I'm done and I'm going to keep rolling with that. That's bad, right? So you want to always be questioning your stuff. And I find this a problem politically and religiously. I see both atheists making errors here, and I see people in politics on both sides of the political spectrum making this mistake, is not questioning themselves on their own side enough, right? And even
totally
treating
agree.
someone who doubts and questions as a traitor, like as someone that you're going to like punish. Like, how dare you question this? How dare you ask these questions? How dare you ask for evidence?
Oh yeah.
And there is a harassing version of asking for evidence, like being irrational about when you're asking for an irrational amount of evidence, or asking for evidence when you can easily go get it yourself. So that's true. But I think what happens is you have people encounter the trolls that do that, and then decide that all asking for evidence is some sort of trollish behavior and is to be punished and opposed, rather than sifting the wheat from the chaff and saying, actually, some requests for evidence are valid, and I should be responsible enough to be able to meet those requests.
I completely agree.
I can agree with you more. Totally.
Yeah.
I am sailing that ship with you. Matter of fact, it's funny because because as you know, because I've tagged you on a few things, as you know, Twitter could be a huge dumpster fire. And I've told people going in, look, Twitter is not NonSequitur Twitter. Or wait, there's a NonSequitur channel, but I have my own Twitter. It's not me on YouTube. Twitter is my dumpster fire. I'm like Shannon Q. We go in and just mess with people on and just have fun. But we don't. I mean, not trollish. But I like to run arguments. I like to see how people respond. It's a dumpster fire, and it's funny you mentioned that because you're right. You do separate the chaff from the wheat when it comes to people asking with honest inquiry questions from those who are just trolling. It's a skill set that I think you actually develop over time to just distinguish between the two, right?
Well, I think it gets back to your point about virtues, right? As like I treat this as a virtue. Is like I need to be always able to question my own beliefs, no matter how certain I am of them. And so even when I'm encountering a troll, I will pause and think like, oh, wait a minute, like, can I answer that? Like, do I actually have the evidence on that? Do I know the evidence on that? Before I'll just flame out on them and say, look, that's just a stupid request. Like you can go get that evidence yourself. You're just trying to waste my time, right? Like the evidence, it's like flat earther stuff, you know, it's like,
oh my God.
You don't need to talk to me about it.
Show me evidence of a round ball. Show me evidence water sticks to a spinning globe.
No, man.
Yeah.
I was just freaking
right. And there's an example of the virtue going too far, right? Excessive skepticism, right? Like constantly doubting that whole idea, like show me water sticking to a globe, is like, that's just, you know, like you really just haven't thought this through, right? Like you really gotta.
Right. Exactly. No, they haven't.
It's funny. You mentioned in the lead that I'm known for my books on Jesus mythicism. But I also just recently, my last two books are on ancient science. And one of the things that I've dealt with in studying ancient science is how widespread was the belief that the earth was flat. And you'll often hear like the debunking of the myth that Columbus thought the earth was flat, or that people of Columbus's time thought the earth was flat. Actually, some did. There were debates about it, but most educated people knew it was round. And had really good reasons to know it was round because they actually did astronomy back then. Like they actually measured things, actually looked through telescopes, measured the angles of stars, and talked to people in different cities and compared notes. Like they actually did these things. And if you do them, you find out that the earth is a sphere. It was one of the things that we know, for example, what's that?
NASA's shield.
You're just a shield, NASA shield.
Oh, a shield. Yes. Yeah, of course. I wish that I'd be much better paid than I am now. No, one of the things they did was you can measure where stars are observable at certain times of night, right? And you can go to a different city on the planet, and that star won't be visible anymore because it's below the horizon. And then you can do this from city to city to city, and you can plot out the geometry, and you go, oh shit, it's a fucking curve. They knew that.
To the
They knew
the
that
surprise
in the
of
ancient
no
world.
one.
They knew that even in
Except
the
for flat
time of
earthers.
Aristotle. They knew that, but they had numerous proofs, right? They had tons of proofs back then, before they even put ships in the sky and cameras up there. They had lots of evidence. They had 6 very conclusive proofs that all corroborated the same conclusion. So everybody knew the Earth was a sphere back then. In fact, they needed it because the Roman Empire was so big that maps had to take into account the curvature of the Earth, or else they were inaccurate. So we had Ptolemy in the 2nd century had to figure out methods of cartographic projection. How do you map a curved surface on a flat map and do it accurately so that you can actually correctly calculate distances and stuff? So you better know the Earth is round if you're going to run an empire, right? That's one of the things. But we still had people back then like Tantius who would come along and say, like, just throw all that out, like ignore all of it, have no rebuttal to any of it, and just say, there's no way the Earth is round because that means there's upside down people on the other side of it, and that's just ridiculous.
Flat Earth. That sums it up right there.
Yeah, you got a good point though. If you're going to dominate the world, you better know its shape, right? It kind of helps for logistics.
Yes,
right? That's so fascinating that you looked into the history of that. I think that would be just fascinating to learn more about. Basically, you just described what the world's first early flat earther was like.
Yeah.
I wonder if he like ran around.
We have a
reading,
whole paragraph.
One to rule them all.
Yeah. He has a whole paragraph talking about snow can't fall up, trees can't grow down. It's like.
It's good to know that the arguments haven't gotten any better. That's a good thing.
They haven't changed at all. People still use that one today.
Yeah.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
By the way,
I
if you
studied
need
these things. Yeah.
If you need,
go ahead.
if you need your shell check, Caitlin Chloe's in the live chat. She's the one that issues all these Illuminati shell checks. Just get with her, and she'll cut you your shill funds.
Oh, I see. I gotcha.
We put her in charge of these.
Yeah.
We've been.
This is a very
so far we haven't made a
conspiracy.
dime off of it either, so don't feel bad.
Seems like it'd just be cheaper to just admit the Earth is flat in that scenario. I don't know. Like,
hey,
dude, those guys make bank. Are you kidding? Flat earthers, wow, do they make bank? They get like
no, I mean, if
the
the Earth
to promote that shit.
if the Earth was flat, why would government spend so much money to hide that? Like it just seems like a waste of money. Like,
that is my question. That is my question. Of all the things that they could cover up and lie about,
go find the program where all this tax dollars are going. Like,
right?
Look, that's a waste program. Let's just get rid of that. It's not doing anything.
I just found out she's going to meet you in person next week. By the way,
right? Yeah,
I guess it's going to be.
I'm going to come out to be live in studio for their show.
So I have a question kind of related to that. Maybe you can answer, because I've wondered this for a while now. Why do you think the reason that people are now seemingly, especially in the religious circles, they're cutting off anything that has anything to do with science? Like they're deeming anything that science comes out with as just straight, just bullshit, and they're deeming it scientism. That's a term that I'm hearing more and more and more nowadays is scientism. But why do you think that is? Like, why can't their religion and science kind of work in harmony if you're going to have one or the other?
Well, it's not just religion too. There's people who aren't religious particularly who are also abandoning science. And it's this conspiracy theory mindset, this fear of the world being too complicated. I think that's part of it. People and you write this. It's like the drama problem, right? You have this problem, like you get into a community and you go, oh, I don't want to deal with drama. It's too much work to figure out who's right and all of this stuff. Like, you're wasting my time. It's just easier to just get rid of everybody, that kind of thing. And so science is the same thing. Where you have a lot of fraudulent science. You have a lot of real science. The real science is complicated, and sometimes even then it's wrong, and it gets corrected and changed. And you've got doctors telling you different things, and you've got companies telling you different things. It's just really complicated. And if you haven't been educated in how to discern these things and how to deal with these things, you can just say, I'm just done with this. Like, I'm just not going to believe any of it. Clearly, none of this is trustworthy. I'm giving up on all of it. And then you go and pick some person you think is your authority, someone you think is speaking truth to power, and then you go and trust them, because it's so much easier to just trust one person or one movement or one point of view. The certainty is more comfortable. It gives you cognitive closure. And that's what conspiracy theories in general do, is the world is complicated and we can't control it. and we don't know most of what's going on. Like your politics and stuff, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Oftentimes, they just don't know what's happening, and that's very disturbing to people. Like people want cognitive closure; they don't want uncertainty, they don't want ambiguity, and cognitive closure is painful, or not having cognitive closure is painful. It's like physically and mentally painful, whereas certainty is comforting. So that this is why people drive to faith beliefs. This is why they drive to dogmas. This is why they drive to ideologies. It's comforting to do that. It's just calming. Say, okay, now I can just say it's all this. I can rule everything else out. It's not complicated. It's simple. And of course, that's not the way the world works, unfortunately.
Right.
And so that's what makes it difficult. And it is a psychological problem that is pervasive in humanity. It's like we all have some amount of ambiguity and tolerance, which is an actual psychologically measured attribute in people. It's an intolerance for ambiguity or uncertainty. And some people have more of it and some people have less of it. It tends to be the people who have the most of it are conservative and the people who have less of it are liberal. That's becoming less and less the case, but had been the case for a while. Yeah, it's a thing that if you can recognize it in yourself, you can work around it and say like, okay, I've got this problem. I gotta like not be seduced by the attractiveness of simplicity and keep telling myself the world is not simple and work around that. But that is uncomfortable. Like it's uncomfortable to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
The only problem, the thing that I see is that people drive to things that are just completely out there and have no basis, like rooted in either evidence or reality. Like they go to things that they drive away from the thing that you can actually see data for and examples of why it's this way, and they instead opt to go for models like flat Earth. I mean, how in the hell you jump from hearing about the flat Earth and saying, okay, yeah, that sounds good. That's how it has to be. And it's growing. Like their movement is growing, not shrinking. And I can't wrap my mind around that.
They just simply don't have the mindset to understand some of it. That's why.
Well, one of the questions that if you ever get the opportunity to just interview them rather than debating them is the thing that I would want to know. Like if I wanted to ask a bunch of them a question, the first question out of my mouth would be, why do you care? Right. Then this is the first question you should ask anyone on any issue. Like if they're like fighting against trans rights or they're fighting against gay rights or they're whatever their position is, no matter what they're fighting for or whatever argument they're trying to make, first thing you should go for is like, why do you care? Because once they start talking about why they care, then you start looking at you start seeing motives start spilling out. And then now you start to think like, well, to what extent are you being driven by motives rather than evidence? Like you have certain goals, and you look at like climate science denial. This has been studied a lot, and we know climate science denial stems from opposition to policies. So really, like they don't like the policy implications of global warming. So it's convenient for them to deny the fact of global warming, which is confusing two different things. You could admit the fact of global warming and at the same time oppose the policies, and you can give principled arguments theoretically against those policies, but that's complicated, and it has to be simpler than that. It's offensive that especially if you yourself think that if the fact is true, the policies are right. You don't like the policies, therefore the facts have to not be right. So this is the thing: is like if you fear that if it's true, you're not gonna like the significance of that, the consequences of that. So to avoid that, it's either just deny the facts. And so you see Christianity is driven by this a lot, like atheism. You see the way they talk about atheism. It's like how they're afraid of the consequences of losing their faith. And so they come up with all these rationalizations not to give it up. It's the same kind of motivation. So a lot of times people have their motivations, the motivated reasoning is what's driving them rather than the facts. The rest is just rationalization, which ironically, the smarter you are, the better you are at rationalizing a false belief. So that you can have really smart people defending these really preposterous things because they are the best at coming up with elaborate reasons.
We see it all the time.
To believe that. Yeah. So I mean, that's the psychology you're dealing with. And I think like it's helpful to go right at like, why do you care? And that's what I don't know about flat earthers specifically, is like, I've never asked them that. I don't know what drives them. What fears do they have about why does the round earth scare them basically? Like, why is it a problem for them? The earth is a sphere. And that's the first place I would go.
It's I think it has from the people that we've had on here. I think it stems from the fact that they feel that if NASA can lie about that, then they can lie about anything. And I've asked this question a lot, like what's like why would they make this up? Like, why is the shape of the earth something that they would create this conspiracy of all the things that they could do with that money, that many people who are involved in the conspiracy? And they always say that it's because they are if we know that we are the center of the earth, if we realize that we were put here for a reason and that we truly are the center of the universe, then the notion that the church is wrong or that God doesn't exist crumbles. So they keep this spinning earth going through the universe because it challenges what the Bible says about God. So as long as that model's up there, then there's always a reason to challenge.
Well, okay, that explains
God.
the ones who defend flat earthism from a religious motivation. But there are some flat earthers who aren't religious too, right? Like there's some. I know
why they do it. Yeah,
okay.
He's spot on about the religious people. The reason why the other people do it, and this is from a lot of experience with dealing with these people, and I'm not trying to be demeaning, but this is just a fact that I've come to conclude. Many of them do not understand concepts well. They don't understand the science at all. And I think that they want to feel special as if they have some kind of Gnostic knowledge that nobody else has.
Oh, yeah,
a sense of importance.
It's edgy.
The literature I've read on the psychology of conspiracy thinking supports what you just said. That's a big factor in the drive for conspiracy thinking. It makes people feel good to think that they have insider knowledge.
Right.
And that's especially the case when they're confronted by a confusing world that they don't understand anymore or are afraid of. And that can be a bigger thing, like just the whole society, all the shit that's going on. It's just all too much. And it makes more sense if they can say, like have this insider wink, wink knowledge with each other. Like, oh, I know what's really going on. Okay, I've got
got the secret handshake and everything.
Around this. Yeah. No, that's true. And it's interesting that there's an interplay of excessive doubt and excessive gullibility going on at the same time in people who are afflicted with this.
Well, these people are full of contradictions, so that doesn't surprise me that they have their own epistemic contradictions, right? Which, by the way, I wanted to ask about certainty because you had mentioned it earlier. I know it's a little tangential, but I believe that we can have certainty inside of a framework, inside of an epistemic framework. I don't think anybody has Cartesian certainty, and I don't think we should ever try for Cartesian certainty. It's just beyond our ability, right? So when we say we have certainty of something, I usually mean it. We have certainty within a system. Like I have certainty that 1 + 1 = 2. It equals. By axiomatic definitions, 1 + 1 = 2. It's an analytical proposition. So I'm fine with that. But you're right.
Analytical propositions. It's funny that you mentioned this. That's the analytic synthetic distinction. There's analytical.
I don't know if it really exists. That's a different argument, but if there really is a distinction.
I think that under certain definitions of exist, that is something you can have Cartesian knowledge about. And in fact, I'm actually going to publish an article about this Monday. It's going to go up on my blog. And it's because I've been dealing, I don't know if many who are probably listening in know I've been pulling my hair out, dealing with certain individuals in the atheist movement who've been trying to
didn't notice
to argue that we can have certain knowledge that there's no such thing as it's like even like we can say that miracles have an absolutely zero probability of being true, and they it's like there's no doubt. There's absolutely no doubt, and I can't see
that as an argument though.
Right,
is that what you're arguing against?
And that we can't call knowledge probabilistic because that means we have to assign numbers to it, and we don't know what the numbers are. Therefore, knowledge is not probabilistic. Like. These are the kinds of ridiculous arguments, but
I'm fine with these are argument when it comes to knowledge.
These are atheists.
I look at belief knowledge on the landscape.
So I'm going to put out an article where I'm going to talk about these things and with quotes of what they said and like why they're just ridiculous things and why it's almost like flat earthism with respect to logic in a way. And so, but yeah, and one of the things that I bring out in that is that there is certain knowledge with respect to what I call Cartesian knowledge, which is just knowledge of present uninterpreted experience. So like that I am experiencing being in a room right now at this moment is undeniable. There's a zero probability that that's false. Now my statement could be false because I could be lying to you, for example, or I could be using the wrong words to describe what my experience is. But my knowledge that the experience is true is right now. But the fact that I'm actually in a room right now, that is not absolutely certain. Now, it may be very, very, very certain. Like it may be so certain that we don't need to worry about the probability that I'm wrong. And that's the case. Like I don't need to worry about the probability that I'm wrong, but the probability that I'm wrong is not zero. There is a non-zero probability that I am not in a room right now, that I'm somewhere else and my experience is misleading me. And there's lots of ways that could be, both scientifically proven ways that could be, and ridiculous ways that could be. Yeah,
I totally get
and
what
we
you're
have
saying,
to account for that.
But there's so many different arguments pro and far of that. I mean, you can go. I mean, I know people don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but you can get into Popper's arguments against brain of the vat and Cartesian and demon. Dark Heart's demon. You can get into things like even Wittgenstein's argument.
And I think we need
being extreme,
our epistemology needs to be able to deal with those things. Yeah,
I agree. And,
yeah,
and I agree. If you're looking at it from a Cartesian sense, there is no such thing as a zero probability in that regard. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, there is, but only for statements about your own present experience, not your interpretation of that experience. Once you start talking about shit outside of your experience, once you start talking about shit outside of that, well, now you can be wrong about things. And you can always be wrong about things, which is why you always need to question and always need to test things. You always need to make sure, what evidence do I base this belief on? Like, and even like one of the things that they were bringing up is like, how do you know that your memories from 8 minutes ago are real and weren't just fabricated? And it's like, well, we can talk about like what would be required for that to be the case, for my memories to have been fabricated from 8 minutes ago and beyond, for those memories to be fabricated. We can build out systems of explanation. And once you look at how complicated those theories are and the fact that there's no evidence for them, you can show that their probability is really small, not zero, but really, really small. So we can go through life assuming that they aren't true until we run into some evidence that they are true. And many movies have explored this. Like you look at The Matrix, for example, look at the journey that Neo goes through. If you went through that journey yourself, you would agree, oh crap, I am not in a room. This is a whole fucking computer simulation that I'm in. If you had that evidence to back it up, right? But other than that, like the odds that you are in a matrix are just so low that it's not impossible. It's just really improbable. And I do think from a philosophical perspective, we do need to be able to answer this and explain why are we logically justified in saying that probability is not 50% or 80% or whatever. And that's useful for your philosophy, for your worldview, but obviously it's a waste of time and very inefficient to have to tackle that question every minute of every day, right? So like you revisit it, you have to make space to revisit it, make sure like I'm gonna fact check this again. Okay, yeah, I'm good. Move on. But so there is excessive doubt, like constantly doubting things, constantly thinking, wait, am I in a matrix right now? Like that. Constantly doing that is very inefficient and not practical. But you do, at the same time, shouldn't just dismiss it out of hand. It's something you should think about. It's like, well, why am I sure that I'm not in a computer simulation? And the process of doing that, like when you think that through, you learn a lot of stuff about yourself, about why you believe the things you do, about how logic works, about what it even means to be in a computer simulation. It's actually really fascinating and educational to go through these deep mind experiments, and I do think that people should do them more often.
Sure,
could agree more.
But improbable doesn't mean impossible. That's true.
Yeah,
but I think that people could make arguments for that, though.
Yeah, there's a sense where people use the word impossible. Yeah, in colloquial English, people will use the word impossible and mean just really, really improbable. And like if you query them, you can figure that out. Like they say, oh, it's totally impossible that North Korea will nuke us, and you're like, well, do you mean its probability is zero? Like, no, but it's just so improbable. And so what they're saying, like they're using impossible in a hyperbolic way. So you do have to be on your toes for that. It's like, what do you mean when you say impossible? Most people, like you said, don't really think this through when they're saying these things.
But there are some arguments, and they're good arguments. And like you said, these things could take you down pathways of epistemic craziness. I mean, you can lose yourself in a lot of these arguments. But I mean, there are some really decent arguments.
I find them fascinating, though.
I love them. I love
cul-de-sacs.
Why do you think I have gray hair, dude? This is gray because of those very things. But there are some really good arguments. Like Popper's argument, I think, is very good about using linguistics as why, like, we can't be a brain in the vat, because the word brain and vat means different things now than it would be if it was like the actual terrain. And I love using the map terrain analysis because I don't like
that. I'm not convinced by that.
I love it.
I think it's a bad argument. Well, yeah.
Well, okay. I think it's a good argument, but it doesn't necessarily make it so, right? It doesn't make it a fact. It's just an argument against it. And I think there's arguments pros and cons, but I think you're absolutely right. It's very difficult to know one way or another to say, yes, there are things that are extremely improbabilistic, but you can't say impossible in the Cartesian sense. Would you agree?
That's right. Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Most human knowledge, in fact, actually is defined that way. Yeah.
But don't you find extreme religious people, because again, I'm not against religion, but all extreme religious people, like presuppositionalists especially, they love to use that epistemic certainty for argumentation reasons. And I find that to be a completely dishonest approach.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think I've ever seen a presuppositionalist that I thought was honest.
No, they don't exist.
They read as con artists. They really read as con artists. Like the way their argumentation works, they're almost a masterclass in trolling, right? It's like disingenuous argumentation is the definition of a troll. And trolls can have multiple motives. But the one thing that makes all trolls alike is disingenuous argumentation, insincere.
But are you using your reason or logic to come to that conclusion, Dr. Carrier?
Are you using your
experience?
Like, yeah, so
using
what?
Experience. Yeah.
Okay.
They love that kind of word manipulation. It's like, well, how you asking me to reason if I use my reason to reason my reason? Yes, I do. So what? It's like it's like asking me to do a handstand without using my hands. You have to use your reason for it. What's wrong with that?
If you have to go to those kind of links, I think that your argument is weak on its face. You know, like if you have to jump through or have people jump through all of those hoops to get them where you want them to go, I think that you don't have a very strong argument that can stand on its own. And that's the reason why you've seen presup arguments and people who are, proponents of that die out. They're virtually non-existent now.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that was because of a lot of people that were involved in that to get rid of them.
Yeah. I found much more useful. There's another version of that. So the presuppositionalist argument is that you can't use reason unless God exists. Therefore, you can't argue God doesn't exist without admitting God exists. Right? That's like the fundamental presuppositions. Yeah. But there's another version which is called the argument from reason, which is not a presuppositionalist argument, which is just an argument from evidence, which is that the evidence of how we reason and that we reason is evidence for God, and that's a much more straightforward traditional argument. And I've written on this. Victor Reppert wrote, I think, probably the best book ever on trying to advance this argument. I think he's totally wrong, but if you want to see the best representation of this argument that's in print that I know of, it's his book. And I wrote an extensive rebuttal, like a detailed rebuttal on, you can find it through my web and various places. Google it, Richard Carrier, Victor Reppert, and the argument from reason. But what I found it was fascinating was in addressing that argument, I thought they raise a lot of very interesting questions about, well, actually, how do we explain these things? What is the science? So you go look at the science. It actually turns out brain science and cognitive science have actually asked these questions and actually have a lot of data that's relevant to these things and that I didn't know about. And so I look into it and I go, oh, look, actually, these are actually really good explanations. And then there's things that haven't been thoroughly answered. Go, well, how do you answer that? And so like trying to understand, why does our reason work? Why do we reason the way we do? Why do we trust reason? What are logical laws? Like, where do they come from? Why are they true? Why do we think they're true? These are all interesting questions, and I do think our worldview should have answers to them. And I think that's one virtue of the Christians who try to argue this way. And I'm not talking about presuppers. I'm talking about the ones who advocate the argument from reason. Is that they are asking us to, like, actually, your worldview should account for these things, and if it doesn't, that should concern you. And they're absolutely right.
No issue with that.
I think, yeah, exactly. And that's a good example of like that's healthy doubt. And I found that like that caused me to like question these things and look into them. And of course, I ended up on the other end realizing that no, these doubts aren't warranted in the long run, but the questions were valuable and it was important to be able to answer them. And so this is why I don't think all Christian apologetics is useless. Sometimes it actually asks some interesting questions that aren't being asked otherwise. Like I don't think anyone would have asked some of these questions had Christians not been trying to find a way to prove God exists. So like looking for every possible thing they can. And sometimes they come up with something that's interesting. And you want to like, the fine tuning argument is an example of that. Is like, that's actually something very interesting. And there's a lot of facets to that and so why that is and all of that. They're trying to prove God exists. So they're really focused and obsessed with that. Whereas we're like, oh, that's actually an interesting question. What is the answer to that? Like, so it's actually a more the healthiest doubt would actually not use that to defend a dogma, but use that to just actually sit back and say, actually, what does explain these things? It might not necessarily be the theory that I want to be true. And that's, of course, apologetics for anything, like apologetics for atheism, apologetics for a political position, apologetics for Christianity or Islam. It's all trying to get the conclusion you want rather than asking, actually, should I want that conclusion? Should that conclusion even be true?
And I think that's the big point. I have no problem with the type of argumentation that uses reason to come to a conclusion. That's a different approach than starting with a presupposition and trying to find evidence and argumentation to support your presup. That I find it only works in certain instances, but presupposition apologetics, no, it doesn't work. But you had I don't know if you want to get into it yet, but you had mentioned some of the things you've written. And I know we don't have too much time, but do you want to quickly switch to your version of your blog on objective morality real quick? Because I kind of wanted to touch on that before we have to
Yeah. All right. We got to go soon, right? So is that?
Yeah, I know.
Or is that no?
But,
yeah.
Well, we got time.
We have a whole hour, right? Is that?
No.
When do I have to go? Tell me when I have to go. What's how much time do I have left?
About a half hour.
Half hour. Gotcha. Okay. So people can go to my blog, which is richardcarrier.info. Just Richard Carrier, one word, .info. And from there on the right hand side is categories, and you can go in there and you can see meta ethics. So META ethics, meta ethics. Click that, and then all my latest articles on meta ethics will come up. One of which will probably be the one you're talking about. I don't know which one actually you mean, because I've written several.
There were two main ones. One of them was just basically your description of why you think there's objective facts, and that people tend to just arbitrarily by fiat say there's no such thing as objective morality, and that I find to be odd. I've heard a number of atheists just ipsy dixie say, "Oh, okay, objective morality cannot exist." I'm like, why? And I've never heard a good argumentation of to why that is the case. I am fine with objective morality. I'm fine with objective facts. I think those are the case. I do tend more personally. I like error theory. I know you're not a fan of it, and other people aren't a fan of it, but it kind of makes sense to me. But I don't subscribe to one particular view on this, right? But to say that you cannot have objective morality to me is just bizarre.
Well, I think error theory has a value as a psychological hypothesis, in the sense that a lot of the moral theories people advance are constructed on error. And so error theory actually does explain what they're doing, because they think they're seeing something that's not there. So that's real. I think that actually happens. I think there's a lot of times, this is, again, motivated reasoning. Like, why do you care? That's the thing you ask someone, is like, if they're trying to say objective moral facts don't exist, the first thing you should ask them is, why do you care if objective moral fact? Why is that important to you? Why is it so important to you to deny that objective moral facts exist? And then you'll get like a whole list of motives. And but you'll see it'll be different for different people. I've noticed this.
Sure.
But it does get to that issue. And I think the reality is that people, it's another example of what they think objective moral facts mean. What they think the word objective means is confused or variable, or doesn't agree with what other people mean. I don't think people actually sit down and think through, what do you mean by objective? Like, what does that even mean exactly? And then especially if you try to apply their definition to anything else in the world, like what is an objective fact then? If that's what you think your definition of objective is, are there any objective facts? And so you have to you have to go through that exploration. You have to start at the semantics. What do you mean by objective? And then work your way through that. So you've got different ways to go at this. Like, one is motivation, one is the semantics. What do you mean? And the other gets down to just evidence. And morality, ultimately, it should be like, the fundamental thing is the moral fact should be what you ought to do above all else. That should be like, it should be the imperative that supersedes all imperatives, which means it has to be true, and there has to be no other imperative that's true that supersedes it. That should be basically what it is. Now, once you define it that way, hypothetical imperatives become moral facts. There is always going to be a hypothetical imperative that overrides all other hypothetical imperatives. And so Philippa Foot's original theory is correct. Philippa Foot, the inventor of the trolley problem, incidentally, for those, one of the greatest philosophers.
I know the trolley problem, but I never really knew who invented it.
Yes, Philippa Foot. She's one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century.
You're right.
And she developed the theory that moral facts are a system of hypothetical imperatives. And I think that's, so normally when you go to school and you go to intro to philosophy, they'll teach you there's three moral theories. There's consequentialism or teleological ethics, utilitarianism, Mill, etc. There's deontological ethics, Immanuel Kant and all of that. And then there's virtue ethics. There's Aristotle, right? And that's it. Your moral theory has to be one of those. Versus But Philippa Foot came along and said, no, it's hypothetical imperatives. And she's obviously right. I've written about this too. If you go on my blog and look for all your moral theories are the same, just Google that, look for that or search that on my blog. I point out, like, all these theories are really just Philippa Foot's theory. Like, she really saw through the fog and said, they're all just hypothetical imperatives, systems of hypothetical imperatives. But no one teaches her theory. Like, really, she is as great and as important as those other three. So that those four should be the four that are taught in intro philosophy courses.
So you don't think they're mutually exclusive? You don't think consequentialism is mutually exclusive from deontological?
I think they do reduce to each other. Obviously, the advocates of them think they are, right? This is the
I've noticed that as well.
Aspects of error theory. They think they're competing theories, but I think if you really analyze them, they just collapse into each other. And then when you see them all collapse into each other, and you look back and see what ends up sitting there in front of you, it's Philippa Foot's system of hypothetical imperatives. That's my view, and I've argued this under peer review in my chapter in The Christian Delusion. Is it The Christian Delusion, or is it in? No, it's in The End of Christianity. In The End of Christianity, I have a chapter that was peer-reviewed by 4 professors of philosophy, where I really advocate this position. I only barely mention Philippa Foot; she's in a footnote, but where I talk about objective moral facts and why they actually are empirical facts that science could discover. But you have to actually explain what it is you mean by moral facts before you can accept that, right? And I've written about it in Sense and Goodness Without God. I've written many articles on my blog. So you're right. Yeah, this is a big area of mine that I have a lot of expertise in.
Yeah, see, it's funny. Like I said before, like I tend to virtue ethics, but it doesn't necessarily mean I don't.
I'm a big fan of that too.
Yeah,
and I think
so. I think they all kind of reduce to something.
Yeah, I think that fits into, because clearly Aristotle was right about virtues. A lot of things he said about virtues in their role in moral theory has to be correct. Like, we know moral action has to be habituated. Even if you look at it from any of the other perspectives, whether it's deontological ethics or teleological ethics, whether it's Mill or Kant, it doesn't matter which one you do, you can always take that theory and show that it entails that you need to cultivate virtues for the exact same reasons that you need to engage in the particular actions they recommend, because you have to cultivate the virtues to reliably engage in those actions. And we know this is a matter of psychology. This is science now. So this is one of many scientific predictions that Aristotle made that turns out to be true, is that you do have to habituate these things. They have to become permanent or semi-permanent attributes of your character. They have to be systems you've built into your brain, essentially. And you do have to mediate between extremes and look for the middle ground, where the ideal middle ground is. And we know even our brain does this, like moral theory. Yeah, moral theory in our brain, there are multiple systems operating that seem contradictory, but our brain is trying to run them both and then figure out where the middle is between them, which is basically it's our own Aristotle, essentially. And one of them is tit for tat reasoning, right? Which is justice reasoning, which is basically like, if someone does something bad, you should do something bad back. Like, there has to be equality, and it's more a focus on consequences. And then there's empathetic moral reasoning, which is intention based, which is like, did they intend to do that? If they didn't intend to do that, it's not bad. And so there's like, there has to be payback for the consequences, but there also has to be an evaluation of the intentions of the agent. And these are separate parts of the brain and you can actually damage them separately. So you can fuck up someone's moral reasoning. You can actually get them to answer trolley problems differently if you damage or numb one section of the brain rather than the other. And so we know the brain has built both different systems, and it's trying. And what it does is both systems come up with answers, and it sort of creates a negotiation, figures out, well, how do we come to an arbitration over these two things and come up with a result? So our brain is engaging in argument and arbitration all the time without our even knowing it. But that's how, because it's a kludge. It's just evolved sort of ad hoc over time. So it's just trying to like figure ways to do. It's not efficiently designed at all. But it's trying to do these same things. It's looking at morality from different perspectives and using the different perspectives to try and arrive at sort of a common conclusion. And when they both line up, that's when we feel like it feels perfect and right to us. Like, so that's, oh yeah, okay, we have two different ways of looking at it. Both got the same results. That's actually a good sign that we're on the right track. And so that's kind of what our brain is doing. And the philosophy backs that up, like in terms of which philosophers sort of pick which part of the brain that they want to side with, rather than agreeing that they're both right. And so, you know what I mean?
know many people with numb brains.
Quite a few.
Or just outright damaged brains. Yeah, there are lots of history, lots of documented cases.
You had asked about why some people do what they do, why they believe, like, for example, the reasoning they don't want objective morality. And this is what I find this to be a very flawed line of reasoning, but this is often what I hear. They suggest that certain theists, not all, certain theists suggest that if you have an objective morality, you must have a deity because it's somehow prescriptive and written on the fabric of the universe, which I think is asinine. I don't find any of these things to be prescriptive. I don't find any of them. If you,
ironically, a non sequitur.
Right.
But anyway, go on.
It isn't.
Hey,
yes,
we need a
really
bell.
is.
We need Dave, producer Dave.
Yes.
We need like a non sequitur bell that we can ring whenever that happens. That happens all the time.
We do.
No, but continue.
Yes, we need to get one. You're exactly right. Right, that is a non sequitur. But that's the argumentation they use. Is they say, well, the theist is positing if you have objective morality, you require God, which is one, bullshit. And two, I don't know how anybody would rationally argue that if objective morality exists, which I think that you're exactly right. In some cases, of course, it's a hypothetical imperative. But so what? It doesn't require a deification as a grounding for it. I think there's a dishonest approach when theists do that. And I think that the atheists that say there's no such thing as objective morality because of that are just falling into the theist trap. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same mistake. It is the result of not thinking it through. In a sense, like, you know, the atheists hear the Christians say this is like, well, objective moral facts are true. The only way that could be is because of God. And so the atheist gets, well, heck, then we can't have objective moral facts because I can't accept the consequences of that because that doesn't line up with all the other evidence I have and so on. But that's just, like you said, it's a non sequitur. That doesn't actually work out that way. But it is, not stopping and not questioning the premise there. It's like, well, actually, your assumption that if objective moral facts exist, therefore there is a God, even that assumption is not valid. And that can be harder to get at, to like explain why that's the case. And that requires deeper thinking. It's more thought, more cerebral. It's harder. It takes more time. And people don't like work. So
these are not easy topics. And I got to tell you, whole objective, subjective thing. I think it's screwed from the beginning. I watched a brilliant video from a guy I love.
There's a semantic fog there. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. Ever watched Sisyphus? Ever heard of Sisyphus Redeemed?
No.
He's a PhD that used to make videos years ago. I mean, his last video was probably 2012. It's been a long time.
Okay.
But he was a PhD in philosophy. Brilliant guy. And he was writing some kind of thesis. And I don't know if he ever finished it. I'd love to read it if my knows if he did. But he was writing that the whole objective-subjective distinction was bullshit from the get-go. And it's just gone down to a quagmire because all the different philosophers use these words all differently to the point where it's not even a rational argument any longer. And I think there's something to be said about that because when I was trying to learn about these things, I was just lost. I was like, what the heck? One person would use it this way. One person would use it this way. One person would argue this. One person would argue that. I'm like, I don't like this. It made no sense to me. And now that I'm starting to at least understand it, I'm realizing it's all bullshit. I don't think there's really that much difference. And I think it's just people using these words arbitrarily to try to foster whatever narrative they want to foster.
Yeah, and it's similar to the way that theists try to pejoratize the words atheist, secular humanist, and so on, causing actual atheists and secular humanists to avoid using those terms because they're pejorative, or they become pejorative, or they're perceived pejoratively. So you have people like, well, I'm just an agnostic, because they don't like the impact of calling themselves an atheist on other people, and they don't like that. They don't want to associate themselves with that negative impact. And it's the same thing with subjective. I'm agnostic, but I don't care about that.
Just let you know.
Yeah. Well, it's the same with subjective.
Because people do that against me all the time.
They do the same thing with subjective, saying like that subjective is somehow a pejorative. If it's a subjective truth, if it's a truth based on your perception or your feelings or something that's inside you, that's bad. And so they stigmatize that. And so that atheists basically learn that same stigmatization and try to avoid it and say like, oh, it can't be that. But then, when you have the same problem when they say, so this is what the Christians play on this, right? So they go, well, if it's subjective, that's bad. Therefore, it has to be objective. Therefore, it has to be God. They can twist atheists around in a knot over this, rather than atheists just starting saying, well, actually, what you're talking about in terms of subjective, objective, everything is in some way subjective and in some ways objective. And so that's not really a useful distinction, what we're talking about here. And so you actually recategorize what the debate is about. And then you just bypass the entire rhetoric of theists. And theists have a hard time with this. Like, they get very confused by it and keep trying to push you back into their narrative that they've built, because they don't understand.
You know
they're confused by this new narrative. And that's a problem.
What I find the most is that they love, and it's not all of them, but just I don't want to speak, in generalities, but
Yeah.
a lot of them, they conflate objective, subjective, absolute, and relative as if they're all just universally interchangeable. And they're not. Subjective and relative are not the same things. Relative is the opposite of absolute, not subjectivism. And I find that that's where they get a lot of confusion. And by the way, you mentioned like Gnosticism. I love when people do argument to motive, right? They're like, Steve, you don't want to self-label as an atheist because you're afraid of the stigma. And I'm like, okay, first of all, that's ridiculous. Have you met me? I don't give a shit what people think about my personal beliefs. Okay, I just don't care, right? I mean, come on, I've been doing this for years. So that's not really an argument. But I take it because I epistemically an agnostic, just like a weak atheist would say, well, you know what, I'm a weak atheist because of this, this, and this. I'm like, okay, I agree with that. I'm just calling it agnosticism because that's what it is in philosophy. Fair enough. But it is funny how people love going into that kind of a motive type thing, saying, well, you're afraid of the label atheist. Well, what's funny is I know a lot of agnostics, philosophically speaking, that self-identify as atheists. They don't give a shit about the stigma. Yeah. So maybe that's kind of a good thing that people are getting the fact that atheism should be more normalized. Absolutely. The word should be normalized. There should be no stigma attached to it. People that adhere to atheism, whether it be the formal or the colloquial, it doesn't matter. They should have the same exact rights as anybody else. Freedom to have religion, freedom not to have religion. It's the same coin, just flip side, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I don't take that label because philosophically I'm not atheist, so I just don't feel comfortable taking a label that doesn't describe me properly. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Yeah.
Okay.
So
this was fun.
Let's it is. Let's switch gears though before we have to go, because I want to find out about how you're feeling about Mythcon and what you guys are debating and the details on that. What are you and Sargon actually going to be debating at Mythcon?
Well, we will have a pre-debate conference, he and I and the Mythcon folks, and we'll talk about that a little bit. We haven't really discussed it yet. I mean, a little, but not a lot.
Yeah.
And, a lot of that, I mean, frankly, for those who really want to know, like, come to the conference, Milwaukee, September, right? If I believe, just look for Mythicist Milwaukee conference. Just Google that, Mythcon, and you'll find ways to get in. Milwaukee's awesome, by the way. So if you've not been, definitely go. Downtown Milwaukee is cool. The Pabst Theater, where the venue will be, is awesome as well. It's a great venue and it's well located. So I highly recommend people just come and attend. Frankly, I'm really looking forward to this conference, not because of the interaction I'm going to have with Sargon, but because of the whole organization of this. I've never seen a conference like this, where it's all panels, where there's people on opposite sides of various issues, and they're going to talk about those issues and sort of air their differences. You're gonna have one of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement is gonna be on a panel with a Black person who has issues of the Black Lives Matter movement, and so that's going to be interesting. I have no idea what's going to happen on that panel.
Awesome.
But if you look at the whole lineup, like every one of these panels is like people with different points of view are going to be talking about stuff. This ties right into your theme for today, which is the whole questioning is valuable. Like, you should be able to hear what people you disagree with have to say, even if it's maddening or it's ridiculous. But you have to be able to actually know why it's ridiculous. If you think it's false, you got to know why it's false. And you really do have to listen to what they're saying, rather than just assume that what they're saying is what you've been told that they're saying. That's another thing. Sometimes they might have like 10% of the things they're saying are actually valid. You say, okay, those are kind of good points. Let's not conflate that with everything else you're saying, but there are some things you're saying that are valid. And I think people need to expose themselves to that for a variety of reasons. One is so that you actually do get your worldview continually challenged. Therefore, it's passed the test, essentially, rather than trying to protect it and defend it from any criticism, which actually is dangerous in the sense, because that allows you to dogmatize yourself. You're resisting any exposure to any possibility of learning that you might be wrong about something. So you do need to be actually make it confront these things. And the other is, if you're going to advocate for your worldview in the world, to be effective at that, you have to actually know what the opponents are saying, and you have to actually get it right. Because if you go out there arguing that the opponents are saying X, Y, and Z, and that's not what they're saying at all, you've lost the argument, because now the people, the audience that you're looking at, they're going to go look and they're going to say, that's not what they're saying. You don't know what you're talking about. You just lost. So if you want to actually be persuasive, if you want to be persuasive in the world, if you want to persuade people who are in the middle, people who aren't decided yet, or people who are on the edges of either one, you need to make sure that you are accurately representing your opponents, that you're actually getting their arguments right. You understand where they're coming from and what they're saying. You have to get it right to refute it. And this is why you have to listen to them. You have to actually, as uncomfortable as it may be, you've got to go listen to them. And if you can't do it, if it's too stressful for you, you should look for people to support who have the energy and time to do this for you. Like, basically be an intellectual leader or someone, an engager, a skeptic, a scientist, whoever, who can actually do this for you and save you the time. As division of labor is fundamental to civilization. But you shouldn't be like condemning the idea of listening to these people, or engaging them, or debating them, or sitting at a table with them and airing out your grievances. That should not be anathema. That we should not be opposing this. This is something that we should support. And that's what Mythcon is doing this. And I've never seen this done on the scale that they're doing it this time. This is the conference that has no precedent. And so just I'm telling people, just go look at the website, look at their lineup of the stuff that's happening, and you're going to be like, I've got to be there myself.
You paused it for a second. You broke up a little bit. We'll put the link from Milwaukee. We'll put the link in the video description. But I'm so glad you said that, because I got to tell you. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, you're going to plug tomorrow's show, I think, right?
Yeah. Go ahead. Kyle.
Well, I was just going to say that Brittany, who is going to be debating Sargon tomorrow, she's actually paneling the trans, I believe, panel at Mythcon too. So it's like a Mythcon double back-to-back day for us here. It's kind of cool.
It is,
it is. But here's the thing. Look, I get really sick when people say, "Why are you giving such a platform?" Now, I agree. There's certain people that are just so beyond the pale, so racist, so bigoted, so just spewing vile. They shouldn't have a platform. I even agree with that. Okay. But that is a very, very small minority. I mean, I'm not going to give, a member of a Nazi a platform. Just not going to happen in my domain. If somebody else wants to, like you said, there are other people willing to sit through that crap to refute it. God bless their hearts, right? I'm not one of those people. But when people say, well, why do you have on such and such? I mean, no offense, you're somewhat controversial in some instances. And
well, Sargon too. We've got a lot of fight for Sargon.
Especially Sargon, right? But people say, well, why are you having these people on? Well, one, I enjoy talking to them. I mean, you're one of my more favorite people to engage with. I love talking to you. I think you have an awful lot to say. I think you're brilliant. I may not agree with you. I'm not a mythicist, but you have a very exceptional way of developing and articulating an argument. That's what I look for, right? And when people say, well, such and such is just, not worth engaging, then you don't have to have them on. But don't tell me that I can't, because that really bugs me. It really does. It's a peeve of mine. For that same reason, like you said,
Yeah, it's a form of coercion contrary to advancing knowledge and improving your own worldview and your own ability to advocate for your own worldview. By saying that no one should ever listen to these people or know what they're talking about, you're basically conceding defeat the moment you do that. It's like someone has to be engaging these people. Someone has to be listening to what they're saying. Someone has to know what their arguments are and how to refute them correctly, or they won't get refuted, and they will prevail over your contrary views. So if even those who really want to advocate against things, if they think everything Sargon stands for, they're against. They really need to know how Sargon is defending those things. What arguments is he disseminating amongst people who are going to pervade these views? And that's the kind of thing we want to get at. Is like what are the views? What is the methodology behind the views? And why do I have issues with it? And that's the kind of thing we're going to talk about at this conference.
Yeah, what's scary though is what's happening nowadays with like Berkeley and the people that can protest and get people, knocked off of a platform to speak. I mean, I think that by
threatening violence. Yeah, threatening violence
to deplatform.
Yeah, making it too expensive to do this, to actually do research, to actually listen to people you want to refute. So you're not even allowed to listen to them for the purpose of refuting them. right? So
It's crap.
this
Right.
is self-defeating. But it's also the other side of this that I find particularly disturbing, which is that when you are using force and the threat of force to silence people, to basically just deprive them of the right to free speech and assembly, you are the fascist in the room. Because that's what fascist means. It means force to compel your will. The moment you've done that, you've lost. You've become the fascist. And I'm really disappointed in the extreme left for basically becoming fascists and advocating fascism while pretending and claiming that they're the ones who are fighting fascism. They're not. They're fighting fascist ideas, but they are doing it by becoming fascists, which is not the solution at all. The civil society requires an agreement that we're not going to silence people with force. We're not going to threaten people with violence, that we're going to allow people to actually say their thing. And if they do it non-violently, that's fine, because what we've gotten in that agreement is they've done it non-violently. And now we can rebut them non-violently. And we've got a whole playground now for debate and discussion and persuasion where no one's shooting each other, no one's beating each other over the head with a club. That is the fundamental achievement of civilized society. And if you're going to reject what we've achieved in terms of creating a civilized society, you're going back to savagery, to barbarism, and to authoritarianism. And I just don't support this. And I'm very disturbed by seeing it happen.
Well, look who we have on next. We have a geocentrist on next, right? We have a geocentrist, and people have asked, why are you giving a geocentrist a platform? Even well-educated people have kind of put forth that. And I'm like, because how else are you going to refute him if you don't know what his argumentation is? Now, I've actually talked about this before, but
your ideas should be able to survive contact with them, right? And if they can't, that's a problem. You should really be concerned about that. You should be concerned about that.
Thank you.
And by the way, we're still looking for somebody. FYI, we're still looking for somebody. If you are a qualified astrophysicist or have a knowledge in that field and you want to come on,
with 8 minutes to go.
With 8 minutes to go. Oh, no, we're gonna. Well, no, it's gonna be like
we'll have a pause
now. But just FYI, we are still looking.
I'm actually tempted to hang around. I mean, I'm not an astrophysicist. I am a historian of science, and as we were talking about earlier, I do know things about the science of Earth.
Oh, you have to stay.
I've studied the history of it.
I would love that, dude. I would be thrilled to death. That would be like awesome.
Yeah. But I don't know. I don't know the modern stuff. Like I don't know it as well as an astrophysicist would, because there's tons of other shit that we've learned that I don't know off the top of my head things. So yeah, it would be better to have a scientist. Hopefully, you'll have some audience members who can chime in the chat room.
I kind of know his argument a little bit. I do know a little bit about the axis of evil approach, but I'm not a scientist, so I don't. I talked to him before when we first came out.
I'll take a break before, but I'll hang around and I'll join you guys in that. Yeah.
Does the live chat want to see that? Cool. Richard Carrier versus Rick Delano. No, I mean, I don't know. I mean, he's not going to be coming on to have like an adversarial type thing. We're just going to have a conversation. It's not going to be like a debate or anything like that. I'm fine with that. Right?
I'll know some good questions to ask. Probably.
That's it. Perfect. Exactly.
He's a very nice guy too. From just my involvement with working with trying to set these things up, because we've got him and some genius on Monday, but he's very nice, very charismatic. Like you
guys are prolific. How many shows do you produce a week? This is like crazy.
5.
We go every day.
Oh my gosh!
We're going to be taking 1 day off a week. And 1 day off a week in July. Plus, I have obviously been on my other channel, my main channel.
Right.
So I got shows on that to do. Kyle's going to be starting something for cooking here eventually. We are busy little beavers.
We stream every day. We've been streaming every day since May. So they all kind of blur together. And I tell people that it's with the content that we hit. Sometimes you feel like you've been streaming for like with the flat Earth streams, they'll last maybe 2 hours, but it feels like a 6 hour. Like I'm more tired at the end of a flat Earth stream than I am at a full day of work.
Sure. Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
And then you got to remember, we got to arrange these things. We got to schedule these things. Kyle has to he makes all these graphics. And by the way, somebody in the live chat was complimenting Kyle on his ability. Kyle's a brilliant graphic artist. There's no question about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's Kyle and I are. It's like 4 a.m. in the morning, and Kyle will be messaging me, "Hey, Steve, we got to do this," or I'll be like, "Can we contact this?" I mean, it never
when I started,
it's 24 hours a day. I'm not even exaggerating.
Steve's beard was black when I started.
That's like the presidency. Everyone who becomes president is
really
gray-haired by the end in just 4 years of time. It's wild. Yeah.
Well, he's seen
Dr. Carrier, we thank
that's
you.
only 4 years old.
Don't tell anybody else that, Steve.
Before we wrap this, and then I'll take a break, and then I'll come back for the next thing.
Sure.
Let me just do some shout outs, actually. So, I'm actually going to be in Huntsville, Alabama next week at a pub meet at the Voodoo Lounge. So, people who want to join me at that, get books signed, whatever, chat about stuff, share a drink, I will be there. So, go to my blog, richardcarrier.info, down there somewhere under appearances. You'll find the info on that, the when and where. And then I'm going to be on the Godless Engineers podcast as well. And we're going to talk about this Crestus app, this app for Google, for Android and for iPhones and iPads that helps with arguing mythicism and historicity of Jesus that we're building and slowly developing. So we're going to talk about that on his show, and I'm going to be out there live for that, or at least in studio for that. But yeah, people want to join me in the Voodoo Lounge next week. That's a thing that's going to happen. And also next month, I'm going to be teaching for the first time. I've just developed a course on ancient atheism. So next month, I do an online course every month on some aspect of history or philosophy. And I will announce this soon. I haven't put it up yet, but it'll come up in a couple days. It'll be on my blog. Actually, it'll probably be next week, but early next week. And I will announce this. You can still find it. You can go to the Google, and look for the Secular Academy. The Secular Academy is where I teach. I have online courses every month on that. And you'll see there the announcement for the latest one, and you can register and everything. To do ancient atheism. We're going to talk about what ancient atheism was like, who our predecessors were, what were they thinking, what kinds of arguments were they using back then, what kinds of pushback was there back then, how was it different from today, how is it similar, and how we can learn more about modern atheism through the lens of ancient atheism. And this is my field, PhD in ancient history from Columbia University. So those who really, there's been some great books on this that have been written and stuff. So definitely look into that for people who want to take that course. And join me, and then you can ask all the questions you have about ancient philosophy and ancient religion and ancient atheism. And yeah, so if you're a registered student, you join the class, you've got my time, so you can ask all the questions you want and about anything that's even tangentially related to the topic.
I think as long as it's not Josephus and Tacitus, as long as we avoid that, I'm happy. I just never want to hear Josephus or Tacitus ever again.
Neither of them really discuss atheism, so.
He knows his shit so well. I just don't want to hear Tacitus or Josephus.
No, that's ancient atheism is different stuff. No, there's way more interesting stuff. There's the Cyrenaics that were led by a woman and were hedonists, and there's the Epicureans, and were they atheists or were they not, or were they atheists pretending to not be atheists, or they were did they believe in extraterrestrials? There's like all this stuff, and there's a variety of different perspectives on ancient atheism that we can learn from. It's really interesting stuff. And skepticism, incidentally, since we're talking about doubt as a virtue, Pyrrhonism, the actual skeptic sect, was actually a sect of philosophy back then of the Pyrrhonists, who were hardcore skeptics. But really, if you look at their epistemology, it's really the epistemology of modern science, which is tentative knowledge or pragmatism, in terms of like saying, I'm going to provisionally accept this now, but I'm not going to say that I'm certain about it. I might change my mind later if evidence comes along, or I might never be certain because evidence might never come along. So that leads to different perspectives on theology. And it's interesting, fascinating to see ancient skeptics, actual skeptics, debating and discussing and refuting ancient theology, which is not Christian theology, but pagan philosophical theology. So it's a different, these atheists were fighting a different opponent back then. Christians were practically nobodies for the longest time. It was, took centuries before Christians become significant. No, the atheists were mostly arguing against a completely different religion and a completely different theology. So if you want to learn more about that, take my course next month.
There you go.
That's badass. And we'll link that in the description below. Mm-hmm. But so we'll take a quick break, everyone. I think Dr. Carrier will be back with us to talk to Rick Delano, and we'll find out about the why the Earth is the center of the universe. So that will be at 10 o'clock in just under 30 minutes, guys. We'll see you in just a few.
Sweet.